okay? I redid this because we had too much information that you guys didn't really need to know, and not enough on stuff you really needed to know. So consulting a little bit of your book and what's on what Score Builders is asking you to know, this is what's on here, okay? All right, so you're going to differentiate between central and peripheral nervous system, and then we're going to understand the primary functions of structures within the nervous system. Some of these structures have many, many functions, but we're not, it's just too much, right? Basically, if you end up as an outpatient therapist and you never treat a CVA, this is gonna get out of your head, and you're gonna have to go back and review it. If you're inpatient or in a rehab center and you treat these patients all the time, that information is gonna be there, right? So some of this stuff is like, you just have to have, right, to understand. Okay, so neuroanatomy. All right, so these are all the components of the nervous system itself, okay? So we have the central nervous system, the peripheral nervous system, the autonomic nervous system. There's nerve cells, neuron structure, synapses, neurotransmitters, axons, white matter, gray matter, fibers, pathways, and the brain. And peripheral nervous system, brain, the peripheral nervous system, then we're going to talk about Wednesdays, everything outside of that, right? All right, so here's the nervous system. You have the central nervous system, the brain, and the spinal cord. The peripheral nervous system, which transmits information to and from the central nervous system. You have the somatic system, automatic nervous system. So somatic controls skeletal muscle. Autonomic controls, regulates glands, blood vessels, so that you don't have control over this. It just happens, right? And then out of this one, you have the sympathetic and parasympathetic. Okay? And we're going to talk about those things. This is just a picture to, where the spinal cord is located. Those nerve roots, we're going to talk a lot about nerve roots, right? Nerve cells. So they're your brain stem and spinal cord. They're composed of these two cells, neurons and neuralgia. Okay. All right, neurons. You have three types: afferent, interneurons, and efferent. Do you know, who knows what afferent neurons are? Okay, and they're what? What kind of neurons are they? They're going up. What information are they giving your brain? Sensory. And then your efferent, or your what?
Motor.
Your motor. Inner neurons?
Connecting the two.
Okay. All right, so these are sensory, your afferent are sensory pathways responsible for receiving sensory input from the periphery of the body and then transporting it up to the brain, okay, to the central nervous system. They connect neurons to other neurons, your inner neurons, and then the primary is to process information or transmit signals. Like, what kind of information is this, right? That's the gateway there. All this, you do need to know, like, their basic function. You need to know that afferent are sensory, efferent are motor, okay? So motor, they transmit information to the extremities to signal muscle to produce movement, okay? All right, and here is, it kind of shows you. So we're also going to talk about dorsal and ventral root, right? Your dorsal root is your sensory, because it's towards the back, and then it's towards the back, and then your ventral root is anteriorly, that's your motor. If you go on YouTube and they will have videos galore for you to be able to understand this. That's on you guys, okay? All right. Neuralgia. I don't know if I'm saying this. These are non-neuronal cells that support critical services for neurons, okay? There's 5 different types. These you need to know for the exam. Astrocytes, oligodendrites, microalgia, ependromal cells, and Schwann cells. Again, how many times do you read these? Not very often. But for the test, you do need to know these 5 types, and then we're going to go over to what they do. Right? So maintain capillary epithelium for neurovascular system. They contribute to CNS metabolism. These is the astrocytes. They regulate extracellular concentration of neurotransmitters. Important, right? We're going to then learn what these neurotransmitters do and what happens when they fail or when there's not enough of them. Proliferate after an injury to create gillar scar. Okay? So I want you to at least know the types and then at least a function of, or what do they do, right? Okay, oligodendrites. They maintain capillary epithelium for neural. Did I write the same thing on this? Looks like it. I sure did. Huh. All right, let's look in your book. Yes. When I was doing like copy and paste, I guess I didn't erase this one. Let's see in your book. What does your book say? Because it's right out of your book.
Oh, the subtopics that you're down.
If not, I will change it for you
No,
guys
it
later.
is in here. I just
Those wrap myelin sheets are axons forming the white matter of the CNS.
Say it aloud again.
They wrap myelin sheets around the axons forming the white matter of the CNS.
Okay, so this is responsible then basically for forming some of that white matter, right? We're going to talk a lot about myelin sheets because those are important, okay? Yeah, oh no, this is the I'm all
Do we need to know about the satellite ones too that associate with like the ion concentration?
No.
No.
This is what I have up here. So this is says it wraps around the myelin sheath. Are we sure we got the right one here?
Oligodendrocytes or the myelin sheath. These are the phagocytes.
Of the CNS.
Oh my gosh, okay, so we're gonna go past that because I apparently wrote the wrong stuff on there. All right, so here actually, okay, so we're gonna do with parts of neuron. I will fix that today. Parts of the neuron, okay? You do need to know the parts of the neuron for your exam. Okay? I'm not gonna read all that for you. But like the myelin sheet, when there's myelin sheet involved, there is a speed of the connection. It's almost like a conducer, right? It makes the signals go quicker. When there is no myelin sheet, then we have a problem, right? Can anybody think of that you've heard of a disease or a neurological disease where the myelin sheet disappears? Emma?
Multiple sclerosis.
What's that?
Multiple sclerosis. Or like beginners.
What is like one of the big ones?
That's the one with
Okay. What is one of the bigger ones that we hear about? It's more pronounced, I would say, right? Guillain-Barré. Have you ever guys heard of Guillain-Barré? That is a total demyelinization of your neurons and your pathways. Okay? Neurotransmitters are very important because without these, neurotransmission issues is Parkinson's. That's a neurotransmitter issue. So we're going to go through all those, but you do need to know this little thing. Surprise! Need to know the parts. Okay? You're like, ah, star, star, star. Okay. The synaptic cleft, okay, it's this connection, right? Or that information. The terminal where you get those exchanges, and that's where that information is transmitted, okay? I'm not getting into the calcium stuff. Like, you don't need to know that. How much calcium is exchanged. You don't need to know that. Just know that that's where this happens, right? If we go back, it says, it's the intracellular space between the axon terminal and postsynaptic target cell. It is the site for interneuronal connection. So it's when one neuron talks to the next neuron. That's what you need to know. Okay? Okay, we're gonna look at this. It's action potential, which means this is what happens within that connection. This is for your information. I hope it works. I hope I embedded it correctly. It's only 6 seconds long. It's taking longer. Tube is not responding. Okay. So.
Mrs. Rosalind,
Yeah.
for the definition of neuron cell body, do you want us to know that in the CNS it's gray matter and in the PNS it's ganglia specifically? Okay.
All right, we will look at that later because I don't want to mess this up. All right. So, common neurotransmitters. You do need to know kind of what they are. And you've heard of these before, right? So, and I give you some examples. Like the first one, if a patient with myasthenia gravis usually has an issue with this neurotransmitter. Glutamate, GABA. I'm not gonna. So dopamine, we know it's Parkinson's, right? Dopamine, Parkinson's. There's an issue with their dopamine levels that causes the Parkinson's, okay? Serotonin, we've heard of serotonin, right? So besides some effects on emotions, it's your sleeping, right? Your sleep cycle. And then norepinephrine is your fight or flight response. I just like the brain. Just trying to make it colorful for you. All right, so we're going to go into the brain, protective membranes of the brain and spinal cord. So you have epidural space, you have a dura mater, actinoid matter, subactinoid space where cerebral arteries are located, and then pia mater. Again, these are structures. We're not going to know, you need to know that. Just, if I say, just know where these are located. Okay? Or when we're talking about something happening in a certain part of the brain, go back and see where it's located. Okay? Know the structures, use it as reference. This is not going to be, I'm not going to give you this as a test. Okay? All right. Hey, Alex, I just saw you now that you were getting on.
Sorry, I think I messed up last time for which one, so.
I'm sorry you're not feeling well. All right, if you could follow with your PowerPoint, I think that'll be easier for you.
Okay, yeah, that's fine.
All right,
So it's the first one, so.
yeah, we're down,
The CNS.
27.
CNS PowerPoint.
Yeah, I think it's the third one on there.
CNS PowerPoint slide, what is it, 27?
26,
28
27.
or, yep.
25?
27.
27.
27, okay. All right, so you see, this is a cross-section of that little square up there, okay? Again, use it as reference when we're talking about something happening. So they're like, oh, they had a bleed in that subdural space. Where is that subdural space, okay? I mean, how many times do you have to go back and look at stuff? Like, you can't memorize all of it. It's just too much. And when you don't use it often, it just goes out of your mind. It's not that you don't know it, it's just not present, you don't practice it. So you have to have references, right? People keep their books for this reason. Okay, so these gyrus and sulcus, this is just the way your brain is formed. Depressions, so depressions are called sulci, and ridges are called gyrus, or whatever. Okay, anyway, so this is to decrease the surface, because if you didn't do that, your brain would be huge, right? It would be really huge. So this is just the way they compact. You know, just know that the ridges are called one thing, the other thing. I'm not gonna say it, so you all laugh at me. All right. So other components of the brain and nervous systems are white matter, gray matter, and then we've talked about afferent, efferent tracts, right? So know that those are named by the point of origin and termination when you see that. But white matter, they appear white because of fat content, okay? Inner surface of cerebrum, and then this conveys information. Gray matter, those are neuron cell bodies. They're in the cerebral cortex, the center of the spinal cord, outer surface of the cerebrum, 2 to 3 millimeters thick, and integrate information. So convey information means they're trying to figure out what that means. Integrate means to kind of put it into play, okay? The spinal cord has both gray matter and white matter as well, and we're going to look at that, okay? So the 5 divisions of the brain. So your cerebral cortex, white, right? Top of the brain, and then within the brain, you have your forebrain, which includes your cerebrum, thalamus, hypothalamus. And then your midbrain, and then your hindbrain, which is your pons, your medulla oblongata, your cerebellum, and then you have the spinal cord at the side. We're going to talk about each of these because they do have, you do need to know a little bit information, like the hypothalamus that regulates important things in our body, right? So if that's not working, then we're going to see what problems we come up with. So the cerebrum, which is what we think of as your brain, right, has 4 lobes. Frontal lobe, parietal lobe, occipital lobe, temporal lobe. You need to know these 4 lobes. And you're going to need to know their primary function. Okay? So your frontal lobe contains motor cortex responsible for contralateral voluntary control of upper and lower extremities and facial movements. So what does it mean that it's responsible for contralateral voluntary control?
It's the
controls the opposite side. So this side controls the right controls the left, okay? Has strong influence over cognitive functions, such as judgment, attention, awareness, abstract thinking, mood, and aggression. Your book has a list of what each of these areas do. Is that, your book looks different. So look at the books, looks different, can you see? Oh, you guys got a new 4th edition? I didn't get one. I got the old one.
What year is it?
You all got the blue one?
Oh.
That's what the bookstore.
Hold on, I'll be right back. Mine is old. I need to ask for a new one.
That's like what I got from Amazon too.
I have all mine digital.
I'm old. I like it.
I don't know. I kind of like having it. I'm like, I don't know. I just think I'll try it out this semester.
Yeah.
I guess it's the last year of the semester, so.
I just don't want to carry as much shit around as I did last year.
But it should just be pages that are different.
I'm gonna buy a new monitor. The money is to buy.
Ours is on page 18.
Have a.
Yeah. Let me see how. Yours. Uh-huh.
Oh, yours is color? This is page 14 for that image. Figure 2.2.
Okay. No, but where's the, like,
18.
18?
Oh, what are you?
18.
These. Okay. I will give, and I can't remember if I put just a sheet in your resources. If not, I can't remember, I will. I took it out of Score Builders, and it just says this side does, or this lobe does this lobe does that, or is it left or right hemisphere? Anyway, here's the information. If I test you on this, I'm going to take it from here, okay? So specific body regions are assigned locations within the parietal lobe for this interpretation. This mapping is known as sensory homunculus. See image 8, which I don't know. Anyway, okay, gosh. So this also plays a role in short-term memory. So if I say, what does the parietal lobe do? It's the primary sensory cortex, right? It deals with the processing incoming sensory information, okay? And plays a role in the short-term memory. All right, temporal lobe. This contains the primary auditory cortex, right? So where's the temporal lobe? Obvious. You don't remember anything about the temporal lobe. It's by your ear, right? So another thing we're going to talk a lot about when we talk about like a stroke patient is Wernicke's area, okay? This is the highest center for interpretation of all sensory systems, and allows an individual to hear and comprehend spoken language located on the left side of the brain. So it's your left temporal, not your right temporal, okay? It, again, comprehends spoken language. It's different than comprehending written language. That's somewhere different. Right? So it comprehends spoken language. So when you answer in your test that it comprehends language, is that correct? No. What kind of language? Spoken, written, auditory? Well, it's auditory, right? Visual perception, music, discrimination, long-term memory, are in the temporal lobe. And the fun project we're gonna do, you're gonna build your own brain to study from. Okay? I'll give you a sneak peek.
Oh, that's.
Yes, you're gonna make your helmet. You make your own study helmet. Okay, occipital lobe, visual. Where's the occipital? If you don't remember anything about it, it's your visual cortex, right? The eye takes the visual signals concerning object in the visual field and relay that information to the visual cortex. So if we have damage in the occipital, we're gonna have damage with your sight, okay? And then association, cortex, cortices, these are regions within the parietal, temporal, and occipital lobes that horizontally link parts of all the cortexes, okay? So example, sensory association cortex integrates and interprets information from all the lobes receiving sensory input and allows the individual to perceive, attach meaning to sensory experiences. Okay? This is where that happens. If all the lobes are sending you a different, that one information, it's coming from different places, right? Because your lobes are, all information doesn't just go to one region, it goes to the different regions, and then these help put all that together for you to then react. Okay? So, you see this blue here? Okay? That's your sensory area. The red one is your motor function. Those, right? So eye movement and orientation, initiation of voluntary muscles are in that motor function area. So even though each lobe has its, jobs, whatever, these two areas in that is motor and sensory. Okay, right in there. And then we're gonna talk again, like the Wernicke's and Broca's area are, sensory speech areas and motor speech area. So Wernicke's is sensory speech area, right? Whereas Broca's is a motor speech. So one is about, did I understand, did I hear right? The other is, can I produce a word to speak? And we'll go over that later, okay?
Is the Broca's area also just in the left? Because you said the Wernicke's area is just on the left.
Yes, I don't remember, so you have to look that up.
The textbook talked about the dominant side, like it's what the role that Broca's area plays on the dominant or the non-dominant side is slightly different.
But it is on the left.
But it referred to it as being on both sides.
All right, the other thing I want you to know, not only what each lobe's primary function is, so what they're responsible for, but I want you to know the difference between your right hemisphere and your left hemisphere, okay? So your book has that. And it breaks it up in, let me see if it's the same. Yep, dominant, non-dominant. Okay, that's different. They're assuming you're right dominant, right?
It said 95% of people are
Right dominant. All right, so, yeah, so let's see, here in my book. So the dominant would be your left hemisphere. And your right hemisphere is your non-dominant. Okay? It matches. inches there.
Yeah, 95% of left.
So this would be on here, this is your right, and this is your left, okay? So your left is more, imagine, more
So
colorful.
we're looking at this kind of from the bottom.
You're looking at it like this, right, left, okay? Because if you look at your book here, mathematical reasoning and judgment is on one side. Now, I'm gonna give you a score builders one that has, very ones, and they're, both sides have some mathematical stuff, but they're a little bit different. One is more like analytical, the other one is a little more straightforward, yes.
I just want to confirm, the right side is our analytical, logical side, the left side is the.
Am I wrong? See, because I'm looking at the book here. Which is the other one over there. So that's right. So this is all right, sorry, this is left, right? This is right. Left, right, left, right.
And the left is the dominant side.
Yes, that's what they're saying.
95%.
95%.
Left hemisphere.
Not right hand, not
right
dominant.
side of the body.
Yes, remember,
Contralateral.
the left side controls your right side of the body. The right side of the brain controls your left side of the body.
So does that mean like since the dominant side, the left side, that's the verbal or analytic side?
Yes.
You're like, so I know. Are you analyzing your?
I'm like, this.
Yeah. Dominant hemisphere has been described as the verbal and analytic side.
Yeah.
And non-dominant is verbal and artistic.
So for all you who are artistic. All right. All right.
Here's where it talked about how Broca's area on the dominant hemisphere plans movements of the mouth to produce speech, but then on the non-dominant side, it's part of nonverbal communication. Broca's
Okay,
area.
so
it has different.
So on the left, if your Broca's area on your left helps you, what was that? Produce speech.
On the dominant side, Broca area plans movements of the mouth to produce speech.
So how am I going to pronounce those words? But if it's affected on the non-dominant side,
It's nonverbal communication.
nonverbal communication,
Gestures, tone of voice.
right? So if you know that that area is affected on the right side and that they're not going to give you, maybe they're not going to give you nonverbal communication. Somehow it's going to be off.
Will their body
Because I can't say that they're not going to do it. It may just not be normal. What's that?
Will their body language be off?
Could be.
I have a stroke patient who, and I'm not sure, I don't know that the Broca's area was affected, but if looking at what you guys are saying, she can only say one word, and it's the word one. So everything you ask her, the answer is one. But the nonverbal cues, if she's upset, it's a one. Like it's very much, you can tell she's upset.
Yeah.
But that's the only word she can say. So that to me would kind of be an example of what that might look like. I just, without looking
Sounds
at.
like she's damaged on the dominant side of her.
Yeah, like she can't form any other words besides that. But there's inflection in her tone, and there's.
She still has normal, gestures.
Yeah,
She can still convey what she was feeling.
yes, and she can still wavy, like, yeah, but there's no other words besides that.
And note that, when we talk about damage in these areas, and this is what they're responsible for, and there was damage, it's hard to say how much damage. Was it uniformly? Was it sporadic? Was it a little tiny piece? Was it the whole area? You don't know, right? By looking at their CT scan report, unless you sit there with the neurologist, and in some hospitals, they're good like that, and they will sit and say, oh, it's in this area and that area. But even when you know what you know, and you're expecting that damage to produce this, you don't know, right? Because the brain is still as much as we know about the brain, it's still not all we know about the brain. So, for many years, we were like, once you have brain damage, that's it. But now that's not it, right? That neuroplasticity and all that, people have, figured out a way, or the brain figures out a way to regenerate in other ways. So when we talk about damage, and this is what you're going to see from this part of the brain that it needs to do, have that in the back of the head and say, well, I know that if this area is damaged, I'm going to see this, this, and this. And I kind of assume that area is damaged, but I'm not seeing that. So then what do? Nothing. You just treat as you would with what you see, right? Okay, I'm not going to read through all these, but these are the deep brain structures. I do need you to know them and what primarily they are do, okay? For example, the hypothalamus, right? It regulates homeostasis and primarily involved in autonomic functions. Those are functions that we cannot control. So maintaining homeostasis of your body, right? So we're talking about hunger, thirst, digestion, body temperature, blood pressure, sexual activity, and sleep-wake cycles. You can't really control a lot of that, right? So the hypothalamus is responsible for that. Okay? And then like the limbic system, it's going to come up, it's made up of part of the thalamus and hypothalamus, is a portion of it's in the temporal and frontal lobes, plays a part in memory, pain, pleasure, rage, affection, sexual intercourse, fear, and sorrow. Emotion, right? And again, because it's part of the thalamus and the hypothalamus, you can't control some of these things. Sometimes they just come on, right? They just overtake you. So basal nuclei, right? It's in the cerebrum and influences motor planning. That's all I don't need to know what it's made out of, because I don't remember either. Okay? So if I say, these are the deep brain structures, know kind of what they do, right? Okay, so like the second one, diencephalon, right? Know that it's major sensory tracts and visual and auditory pathway synapses. All right. So this is where they all are. So this is cerebral hemisphere. When you cut it in, it's a cross section. That's the internal capsule. It's the thalamus. Look at where the thalamus is. Way in there. Okay? I'm not testing you on this one. So then we're going to go down the line. Internal capsule. And here, I just, what it contains. Okay? Cerebellum. And I'm even giving you a picture. Hold on. Where it is. Right? Okay? This controls balance, complex muscular movement. Okay, responsible for integration, coordination, execution of multi-joint movement. So if I ask you which deep brain structure controls balance, you need to know it's this one, right? Or complex muscle movement. It sequences the order of muscle firing, right? Tells your muscles how to go so that you get that continual complex movement. It regulates initiation, timing, sequencing. So what disease process, neurological disease process that you can think of has issues with initiation, timing, sequencing? Among others, I think I would say all of them have. Even a stroke has that problem, right? Then the brain stem. What does that look like? You see what this looks like? That's the brain stem. What did you guys say?
It's like a stem.
Are you talking about like the Santa hat at the top?
Yeah, like the whole thing. What does it look like? I mean, when I looked at it, one thing came to mind right away. A seahorse. We know what side of the brain some people are using. Right? So the brainstem contains the midbrain, the pons, the medulla, and then these arteries. Okay, well, they're part of that. These attach to the spinal cord. So if you have a stroke in the pons area, it's going to happen. Is that where they have that law? I think it affects that. Have you ever heard of that locked-in syndrome? You have a stroke in the pons area. It's called locked-in syndrome. We'll look at it later when we talk about CVAs. You're locked in. Your brain function, your hearing, your vision, all is on. You cannot move. You're locked into your own inside your own body. Okay? Yeah.
So you know everything that's
Yeah.
around you, but you just
You can't
It's
move.
like sleep paralysis all
Yeah.
the time.
Yeah. I saw one case in my career of this young woman. Yeah. All right. Midbrain. This is the relay station for track passing between cerebrum and spinal cord. Houses reflex center for visual, auditory, and tactile response. Okay. Again, so you're thinking, oh, they have all these issues. Where was the stroke? Right? And so we think about the stroke being, oh, it's in the frontal lobe, it's in the left frontal, left parietal. But if you think, and when we talk about the circulation of the brain, any way along that circulation route can be affected, right? So when you have a stroke, it doesn't mean that it's the only spot here. They could be other spots, right? Keep thinking, there's one that's called like not a spray. I always forget the name of it. Where I've seen CT scans, because the strokes or the lack of, the tissue death in the brain looks on a CT scan or MRI looks white, just like bright white. And sometimes it looks like somebody took paint at one like that and it just scattered and you see all these little white dots. Well, all those white dots is damage. So you're like, wow, this is, it can be a spot or it can be just everywhere. And you've treated a lot of stroke patients. They don't always fit into left parietal stroke, right? For strokes, we're going to do more like middle artery, posterior artery. Yeah. Question?
Yeah. So you only get partial damage in an area of the brain, and you might notice that they kind of do something, but
Yeah.
might struggle, but it's not like full damage to one area. It can be
Yeah.
How about every stroke will look different.
Mhm.
It can even be the same kind of stroke,
Yeah,
but they'll present differently. Just because they have a stroke in a certain area doesn't mean they're gonna have those 5 things
Right.
affected. So they'll look different.
when we talk about strokes, we're gonna go into like middle cerebral area stroke and a posterior cerebral area stroke. And they're gonna say, if you have a middle cerebral artery, means the stroke happened within that middle cerebral artery area, whether it was a hemorrhagic, which they bled, or a clot, right? They're gonna say, oh, they're gonna look this way. But then you're like, they don't all look that way, right? So again, you have to understand, if it says middle cerebral artery stroke, they're not all gonna look the same. Because you have to think about, was it hemorrhagic or was it a clot? Right? How severe was it? How long did it take them to get help? When you have because how long did it take them to get help means how long did that expand? Even when patients come in with the stroke on day 1, you see them on day 3, that stroke can still be expanding. So you may come in and say, oh, they got up, they walked, and then the next day they can't. And we'll talk more about what your responsibility is with that. Anything you want to add, Ms. Joanna? The pons contains axons that travel between cerebellum and rest of the central nervous system. This function with medulla regulates breathing rate, right? So what do we think? These internal structures of the brain, when they get damaged, it's very hard to recover from these. I mean, it's just, if you hit the pons, it controls your breathing. What are you gonna do, right? It assists in orientation of the head in response to visual and auditory stimulus. So if you have damage here and somebody's beeping at you, you're not gonna turn. You're not gonna know to even turn to see what's coming that way, right? Orientation of the head. So we might experience dizziness and not aware of where you are, right? Maybe a little bit of a vertigo type thing. And then contains these central nervous system nerves that carry motor and sensory information to your face. So motor, if it's affected, you may not be able to move your face the way you would normally. And then sensory, you may not feel. Or you may be hypersensitive too. So when we talk about an issue with sensory, remember, it's not just like you can't feel. It could go the other way, where you're hypersensitive. Right? And light touch isn't light touch. It's painful. Okay? Yes?
So when you're looking at like signs of a stroke and they talk about like asymmetry, is that specific to the pons, or can that manifest even if it's in a different area of the brain?
Yeah.
So regardless.
Yeah. Because most strokes don't happen in these internal.
Okay.
They're rare.
So this
It's
is more like
in
an
the,
aftermath kind of?
yeah, or additional, it could be other, not just from a stroke. It could have been a traumatic thing.
Or a tumor.
Uh-huh. Yeah. The medulla, is an extension of the spinal cord that carries tracts that run through the spinal cord, okay? So we have that connection between the brain and the spinal cord. They're both sensory and motor. For neck, mouth region, control center of the heart. For the heart, respiratory rate, reflexes for vomiting, sneezing, and swallow. Okay? So these internal, if you can see these internal structures, they're autonomic, means you don't control those, right? So they control a lot of vital functions of our body. I think the only pons stroke I've seen is that lady that was in that locked in state. Yeah. Reticular formation extends vertically through the length of the brain stem. Okay? And this is where it's this blue thing there. Maintains and adjusts an individual's level of arousal, including sleep-wake cycles, infiltrates voluntary and autonomic motor responses for certain self-regulating homeostatic functions, and involved in modulation of muscle tone throughout the body. So you have somebody who has a brain injury where we don't have, right? There's going to be a problem with that arousal level. Corpus callosum. They connect the left and the right hemispheres and allow communication between the two cortices. Okay? And it's right, you get this lateral and then you get this frontal, right? The brain has that division there, left and right, but that one connects with it. They connect to communicate from one side to the other. And that's what it looks like in real life. I like the animated ones, but then real life looks like, wow, there's no color in this brain, right? Kind of boring. All right, circulation of the brain. They depend on continuous supply of blood for glucose and oxygen. Continuous, right? So, side notes, neurons within the brain are unable to carry out glycolysis and store glycogen. Therefore, it is essential for these neurons to receive a constant supply of blood. We all know what happens when there is not a constant supply of blood, right? Your brain tissue dies. So we're going to talk about this more when we talk about CVAs, but you have anterior and posterior circulation. So the, let's see. So the anterior circulation derives the blood from bilateral internal carotid arteries, and supplies the blood to the majority of the cerebral hemispheres, including all the lobes, right, and anterior part of deep cerebral hemispheres. That's the anterior. So if you have a stroke in this area, it can affect all those areas, some of those areas, one of those areas, you know.
So
Posterior, yes.
you want us to know all the areas that it affects, right?
Just what they would affect. This is gonna make more sense when we talk about CVAs. The majority of the CVAs are anterior artery CVAs. I would say most of them are anterior artery. So the posterior derives blood from bilateral vertebral arteries. It supplies the brain stem, cerebellum, occipital lobe, medial temporal lobes, and posterior part of the deep hemisphere, mainly the thalamus. Okay? And then here is your anterior and actually, I was wrong. Anterior, posterior, most strokes are your middle cerebral artery. The posterior is a little bit less common, but they happen. And then this here, you all probably have heard of it. This whole connection there, it's called the circle of Willis. Provides connection between anterior and posterior circulations, providing collateral blood to affected brain regions in the event of atrial incompetency. So they kind of make up for if one side's not working as well as the other. Okay, circle of Willis. You guys need a break?
What is a mastermind?
Anastomosis?
It says that I'm just reading off of the
I think it's when it there's multiple paths, the arteries can go, so they're rejoined.
Yes. You guys need a break before we start spinal cord?
Yes.
Break time. Go pee.